The ink on my high school diploma was barely dry, a testament to a life I was desperate to leave behind. 17 years marked my passage through a town that felt more like a cage, each familiar face, each rutted road, a bar reinforcing my confinement. Escape wasn't a whimsical notion, a youthful yearning. It was a visceral need, an instinct for survival. Thus, less than a week after graduation, I stood before a recruiting sergeant, my resolve hardening into the steely glint in my eyes as I signed my name, a single act severing the ties that bound me. The army beckoned, not with promises of glory, but with the stark, unvarnished allure of the unknown, a canvas upon which I could paint a new existence, far removed from the stifling predictability of Loch Sheldrake, New York. Little did I know the grim palette I was about to be handed, the hues of crimson and ash that would forever stain my perception of the world, transforming the boy I was into something else. The whispers started even before we landed in Europe. Tales of unimaginable brutality, stories that chilled the blood and cast long, ominous shadows over our youthful bravado. The Eastern Front was a charnel house, they said, a maelstrom of violence where humanity was sacrificed on the altar of ideology. But those were distant horrors, relegated to grainy newsreels and hushed conversations. We were bound for the West, where victory seemed inevitable, the German war machine sputtering its last. We were wrong, terribly, fatally wrong. December 1944. A season of supposed peace and goodwill, yet the snow in the Ardennes ran red. The German offensive, a desperate gamble orchestrated by a Führer clinging to dwindling power, ripped through Belgium with the ferocity of a panzer spear, shattering the illusion of Allied dominance and plunging us into a nightmare of ice and fire. Men, barely old enough to shave, found themselves thrust into the vanguard, holding a line that buckled and groaned under the weight of the Wehrmacht onslaught. Surrender was not an option. Malmedy had etched that reality into our collective consciousness, a brutal lesson scrawled in blood and the hollowed stares of the few survivors who bore witness to the massacre. Malmy, a name that would forever haunt my nightmares, a whispered curse on the wind. Among the chaos, the fear, and the deafening roar of artillery, a single figure stood defiant. A 19-year-old American private stranded on a narrow, snow-dusted bridge, armed with little more than a bazooka, a Browning automatic rifle, BAR, a handful of grenades, and an unyielding will that burned brighter than any flame. I was no commander, no celebrated hero, no seasoned veteran hardened by years of combat. I was just another replacement, another anonymous face swallowed by the maelstrom of war. I was not meant to survive that day. Statistics dictated otherwise. The odds were stacked against me, an insurmountable wall of steel and firepower, yet somehow against all logic and reason, I held the line. But why? What possessed a mere boy to stand against the tide, to defy the seemingly inevitable? And why, most perplexing of all, did the elite troops of the Waffen-SS, notorious for their ruthlessness and unwavering adherence to orders, falter in their advance, their momentum broken by the actions of a single, unassuming private? The answer, I believe, lies not in strategic brilliance or superior weaponry, but in something far more primal, something that tapped into the very core of human fear, something that transformed Francis Sherman Currey, the orphaned boy from Loch Sheldrake, into the scariest soldier of World War II. The story of that day is more than just a chronicle of bravery. It is a testament to the power of the human spirit to overcome seemingly insurmountable odds, to the capacity for one individual to defy the forces of darkness, and to the terrifying potential that lies dormant within each of us, waiting to be unleashed when pushed to the very brink. It is a story that I, even after all these years, still struggle to comprehend, to reconcile with the ordinary man I believe myself to be. But it is a story that must be told, a warning and a reminder, etched in the blood-soaked snow of the Ardennes, a testament to the darkness that dwells within the hearts of men, and the light that can still flicker, even in the face of overwhelming despair. The world was ablaze, a conflagration fueled by hatred and ideological fervour. December 1944 was supposed to be a time of winding down, a period of consolidation and preparation for the final push into the heart of Germany. Allied forces had liberated France, pushed into Belgium, and were poised to cross the Rhine. The end seemed within reach, a tangible glimmer on the horizon. But Adolf Hitler, refusing to accept the inevitable, hatched one last audacious plan, a massive counteroffensive codenamed Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, designed to split the Allied front, recapture the vital port of Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace on German terms, a desperate gamble to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. This offensive, soon to be known as the Battle of the Bulge, would become the largest and bloodiest single battle fought by US forces in World War II, a brutal crucible that tested the limits of human endurance and redefined the very meaning of courage. The Ardennes forest, usually a place of serene beauty and tranquil silence, transformed into a cacophony of destruction. The air thick with the acrid stench of cordite, the ground trembling beneath the relentless barrage of artillery, the screams of the wounded and dying mingling with the roar of engines and the staccato rattle of machine guns. Over 200,000 German troops, backed by a formidable arsenal of over 1,000 tanks and assault guns, slammed into unsuspecting American units, catching them off guard and exploiting weaknesses in the Allied lines. The element of surprise was their greatest weapon, coupled with the unforgiving hand of nature. The weather conspired with the enemy. Dense fog and relentless snow grounded Allied aircraft, depriving us of the crucial air support we'd come to rely on. Communication lines were severed, units became isolated, and confusion reigned supreme. The Ardennes, once considered a quiet sector, became a chaotic free-for-all, a desperate struggle for survival in the face of overwhelming odds. The spearhead of this assault was the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, an infamous unit comprised of fanatical soldiers utterly devoted to the Nazi cause. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were battle-hardened veterans, indoctrinated with a twisted ideology and renowned for their unwavering ruthlessness. In earlier campaigns on the Eastern Front, they had earned the chilling nickname Blowtorch Battalion for their scorched earth tactics, systematically burning villages, massacring civilians, and leaving nothing but ashes and despair in their wake. Their reputation preceded them, a chilling harbinger of the horrors to come. On December 17th, 1944, that brutality was unleashed in full view at the Malmedy massacre, an act of unspeakable barbarity that sent shockwaves through the Allied ranks. A convoy of American soldiers from the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion, caught in the German advance, surrendered to men of the 1st SS Panzer Division near Baugny, Belgium. They laid down their arms, expecting the relative safety of captivity, clinging to the hope of survival in a war that had already claimed so many lives. Instead, they were herded into an open field, their hands raised in surrender, their faces etched with fear and uncertainty. Then, without warning, the machine guns opened fire. 81 American soldiers were executed in cold blood, their bodies riddled with bullets, their hopes and dreams extinguished in a hail of lead. The massacre was a calculated act of terror, designed to demoralize the enemy and break their will to resist. A few survivors, feigning death amidst the carnage, later crawled away under the cover of darkness, their bodies wounded, their minds scarred, carrying with them the horrific truth of what had transpired. Their reports of the atrocity sent a chilling message to the Allied command, shattering any illusions about the rules of engagement. For the troops on the ground, the message was brutally clear: surrendering was not an option. Capture meant certain death. As the German advance pushed deeper into Belgium, American units were scattered, isolated, and critically low on supplies, facing a seemingly unstoppable tide of men and armour. Many, succumbing to despair, abandoned their posts, seeking refuge in the anonymity of the forest, hoping to evade capture and somehow survive the onslaught. Others, hardened by the horrors they had witnessed, dug in, preparing to make their stand, knowing that reinforcements were unlikely to arrive in time, that they were on their own, the last line of defence against the German juggernaut. In this hellish landscape, where survival meant holding ground against overwhelming odds, I, a young soldier from upstate New York, prepared to face my destiny. I was no seasoned warrior, no charismatic leader, no expert strategist. I was simply a private, a replacement, a teenager who had barely seen combat, thrust into the heart of the storm. And in the days following the Malmedy massacre, I would do something that would make hardened German soldiers hesitate in their tracks, something that would transform Francis Sherman Currey into one of the most unforgettable names of the war. But who was Francis Sherman Currey? What events shaped the character of the man who would become a legend? Before the war transformed me into a symbol, a figure of myth and legend, I was, in reality, nearly invisible. A shadow in the background, a footnote in the grand narrative of history. I was not born into a military family, steeped in tradition and honour, nor did I come from a privileged background, shielded from the harsh realities of life. I was born on June 29th, 1925, in the quiet, unassuming town of Lochsheldrake, nestled in the Catskill Mountains of New York, a place of simple pleasures and unassuming lives. But my life took a tragic turn at a young age, a defining moment that would shape my character and instill in me a sense of resilience that would serve me well in the trials to come. At just 12 years old, I was orphaned, my parents succumbing to a sudden illness that swept through our small community, leaving me alone in a world that suddenly felt cold and indifferent. I was placed in a children's home, a bleak and impersonal institution, where I learned to fend for myself, to rely on my own inner strength, and to suppress the emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. There was no clear path to greatness laid out before me, no early indication of the warrior I would become, no sign that I would one day stand on a frozen bridge in Belgium, defying the might of the German army. When I enlisted in the US Army at the age of 17, it was not out of a desire for glory or a thirst for adventure. Like many young men of my generation, I felt a sense of duty, a desire to serve my country in its time of need. The attack on Pearl Harbor had ignited a fire in the hearts of Americans, a righteous anger against the forces of tyranny, and a determination to defend the principles of freedom and democracy. I wanted to be a part of that fight, to contribute in some small way to the defeat of the Axis powers. I trained hard, immersing myself in the rigorous demands of military life, mastering the basics of infantry combat, rifle marksmanship, anti-tank weaponry, and small unit tactics. These were standard skills, the tools of the trade for any soldier preparing for battle. But what set me apart, perhaps, was how quickly I absorbed the information, how easily I retained technical details that most recruits struggled to master. I had a knack for understanding the mechanics of warfare, for anticipating the enemy's movements, and for finding creative solutions to seemingly impossible problems. It was as if the hardships I had endured in my youth had forged within me a steely resolve, a quiet determination to excel, to overcome any obstacle that stood in my path. By September 1944, I was sent to Europe as a replacement in the 30th Infantry Division, nicknamed Old Hickory, a unit with a proud history and a reputation for unwavering courage. This division had already distinguished itself in some of the most brutal battles of the war, storming through Normandy in the wake of the D-Day landings, fighting through the hedgerows and holding off fierce German counterattacks in the Netherlands. I wasn't joining a unit of green troops. I was stepping into the ranks of seasoned veterans, men who had witnessed the worst of humanity, who had stared death in the face and emerged scarred but unbroken. For a 19-year-old who had never fired a shot in anger, this could have been an intimidating prospect. But my fellow soldiers quickly noted my composure. I didn't panic under pressure, I followed orders without question, and I was eager to learn from their experience. I listened intently to their stories, absorbing their wisdom and preparing myself for the challenges that lay ahead. Still, there was nothing about me that screamed hero. I wasn't tall or physically imposing, I wasn't an officer, I didn't make rousing speeches or draw attention to myself. To anyone looking at me in December 1944, I was just another replacement, another anonymous face in the crowd, another name on the roster. But that's what makes my story even more startling, even more improbable. In just a few short months, this quiet, unassuming young man would be thrust into one of the most chaotic and desperate moments of the war. He wouldn't just hold his ground, he would change the course of a battle, defy the might of the German army, and become a legend in his own time. And he would do it with a level of calm and calculated aggression that no one saw coming, a level of unwavering resolve that would terrify his enemies and inspire his comrades. The boy who had grown up with nothing was about to take on the most feared soldiers in Europe, and in Malmedy they would learn his name, etched in the snow and fire of battle. By December 20th, 1944, the German offensive had carved a deep and bloody gash into the Allied lines, a gaping wound that threatened to unravel the entire Western Front. The Ardennes, Once perceived as a quiet sector, a backwater of the war had transformed into a brutal killing field, a frozen wasteland where the air crackled with the constant threat of death. Town after town was falling to the relentless push of German armour and Waffen-SS infantry, each victory fueling their advance and pushing them closer to their ultimate goal, Antwerp. Amid this chaos, Malmedy, a small Belgian town nestled near a critical network of road junctions, became a strategically vital defensive point, a linchpin in the Allied effort to stem the German tide. Whoever controlled Malmedy controlled the flow of reinforcements and supplies. The town was the key to preventing the German advance from gaining further momentum. If the Germans captured Malmedy, they would have a direct and unimpeded path to disrupt the entire American defence, cutting off supply lines, isolating units, and potentially turning the tide of the war in their favour. The 30th Infantry Division, my division, was tasked with holding this critical ground, to stand firm against the German onslaught and prevent them from seizing control of Malmedy. One of the key defensive positions was a narrow bridge located on the outskirts of the town, a seemingly insignificant structure that held immense strategic importance. It wasn't just any bridge, it was a vital crossing point that, if taken, would provide German armour with a direct route to roll deeper into Allied territory, bypassing key defensive positions and potentially outflanking entire units. The bridge was the cork in the bottle, the last obstacle standing between the German army and a major breakthrough. And that's where I, Private Francis Sherman Currey, found myself posted on the morning of December 21st, 1944. It was bitterly cold, the air biting at exposed skin, the ground frozen solid beneath our boots. A thick blanket of snow and ice coated the roads, slowing vehicle movement, making it difficult to manoeuvre and deploy effectively. But the snow also provided natural cover in the dense fog, concealing enemy movements and creating an eerie sense of uncertainty. Visibility was extremely low, making it difficult to see more than a few yards in any direction, adding to the sense of tension and unease. Communication lines were stretched thin, making it difficult to coordinate movements and request support. We were largely on our own, isolated from the rest of the division, relying on our own wits and courage to survive. The men stationed at the bridge knew that if a German force pushed across that crossing, they wouldn't have much warning, and they wouldn't have many options for retreat. The terrain offered little in the way of natural defences. We were exposed, vulnerable, and outnumbered. To make matters worse, the horrors of the Malmedy massacre were still fresh in our minds, casting a long and ominous shadow over our already precarious situation. Word had spread quickly through the ranks, carried by whispers and hushed conversations, painting a grim picture of the enemy we faced. Captured Americans weren't being spared. Surrendering meant certain death. The men on that line understood one thing clearly. If the Germans came, they would be fighting for their lives to the last round, with no hope of quarter. I was there with a handful of other infantrymen, a motley collection of young men from all walks of life, thrown together by fate and circumstance, united by a common purpose, to defend that bridge, to hold the line against the enemy and to survive. We were supported by a small anti-tank crew, armed with a bazooka and a limited supply of ammunition, our only hope against the approaching German armour. But the German advance had already been brutal. Anti-tank positions had been smashed, units were withdrawing or being overrun, and the enemy was rapidly gaining ground. They weren't just coming, they were coming with overwhelming force, with tanks and infantry and artillery, with a relentless momentum that threatened to sweep us all away. And then, without warning, it began. The storm broke, unleashing its fury upon us. German artillery opened up, pounding the area around the bridge with a deafening barrage of explosive shells. The air filled with the scream of incoming rounds, the ground trembled beneath our feet, and the world exploded in a shower of dirt, snow, and shrapnel. Soldiers dove for foxholes and ditches, seeking whatever meagre protection they could find, praying that they wouldn't be the next victim of the indiscriminate barrage. It was the classic prelude to an armoured assault. Soften the defences with artillery fire, then roll in the tanks to finish the job. The shells rained down on us, relentless and unforgiving, tearing apart the landscape and shattering our nerves. But amidst the chaos and the fear, I remained strangely calm. My mind focused, my senses heightened, as if the adrenaline surging through my veins had sharpened my perception and steeled my resolve. I watched through the smoke and debris, scanning the horizon for any sign of the enemy, trying to anticipate their next move. And then I spotted it. Movement in the haze, a dark shape emerging from the fog, slowly edging its way towards the bridge. A German tank, its massive form casting a menacing shadow against the snow-covered landscape. Then another appeared, and another, like predatory beasts emerging from their lairs, drawn by the scent of blood and the promise of easy prey. Most soldiers, under such circumstances, would have remained in their foxholes, huddled in fear, waiting for orders, hoping that someone else would take the initiative. But I didn't. Something inside me snapped. A primal instinct took over, and I knew that I couldn't just sit there and wait for the inevitable. I grabbed my Browning automatic rifle, BAR, a powerful weapon capable of delivering a devastating barrage of firepower, and aimed at the lead tank, focusing on the tank commander visible in the turret, his silhouette framed against the swirling smoke and fog. One clean burst of fire, a short, controlled burst that found its mark with deadly accuracy. The German slumped out of sight, his body falling limp within the confines of the turret. But the tank, a mechanical behemoth, rolled forward anyway, its engine roaring, its tracks churning, through the snow, undeterred by the loss of its commander. I knew that this was only the beginning, that the lone tank was just the vanguard of a much larger force, a force determined to seize the bridge and exploit the breach in our defences. The bridge wouldn't hold by itself. It was just a concrete structure, vulnerable to the power of German armour, and if no one acted, if no one stood up to challenge the enemy, Malmedy would fall, and the consequences would be catastrophic. December 21st, 1944, a day etched in my memory with the indelible ink of fire and blood, a day that would forever define my life and shape my understanding of courage, sacrifice, and the terrifying potential of the human spirit. The bridge at Malmedy was about to be swallowed whole, consumed by the insatiable appetite of war, reduced to rubble and twisted metal. The artillery barrage didn't stop, it intensified, escalating in ferocity and precision, as if the German gunners were determined to obliterate every last vestige of resistance. German shells ripped into American positions, tearing apart the frozen ground, showering us with dirt, snow, and the mangled remains of our comrades. It wasn't random fire, it was deliberate, calculated, a textbook prelude to an armoured assault, designed to soften the defences, to break our morale, and to pave the way for the tanks to roll in for the kill. Through the swirling haze of smoke and snow, more tanks emerged, their hulking forms casting long shadows across the battlefield. The first tank I had engaged was just the spearhead. Behind it, at least 3 more tanks and supporting infantry were advancing, their movements coordinated, their purpose clear, to overwhelm our meagre defences and seize control of the bridge. These weren't scattered units. This was a coordinated SS push, an attack spearheaded by the most elite and fanatical soldiers in the German army. I knew what that meant. I had heard the stories, the whispers of their ruthlessness, their unwavering commitment to their cause, and their utter disregard for the rules of war. If they took the bridge, the entire defensive sector would collapse. The German advance would continue unchecked, and countless lives would be lost. And in that moment, something inside me clicked. A switch flipped, and I was transformed. I wasn't going to wait for reinforcements. I knew that there were likely none available, that we were on our own, forgotten in the chaos of battle. I wasn't going to hunker down in my foxhole praying for survival, hoping that the storm would somehow pass us by. I was going to fight. I was going to stand my ground. I was going to defy the odds and do everything in my power to stop the German advance. Fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by a surge of adrenaline, a burning desire to protect my comrades, to defend the bridge, and to strike a blow against the enemy. I sprinted from my position across the open ground under a hail of machine gun fire, heading for a nearby barn where a bazooka was stored. A desperate gamble, a suicidal dash across a landscape of death. I wasn't alone. Another soldier, a young man named Johnson, braved the storm of bullets alongside me, his face etched with fear but his determination unwavering. He helped me load the bazooka, his hands trembling as he struggled with the cumbersome weapon. But I was the one who stepped up to fire, the one who took aim, the one who squeezed the trigger, unleashing a rocket of defiance against the approaching German armour. The bazooka round slammed into the lead tank, hitting near the turret with a resounding impact. Smoke hissed from the point of impact as the vehicle shuddered, its engine sputtering, its tracks grinding to a halt. The tank rolled back, retreating out of the line of fire, disabled but not destroyed. One down, but that wasn't the end. 3 more tanks were still coming, their guns trained on our position, their crews eager to avenge their fallen comrade. For most soldiers, that would have been the moment to retreat, to cut their losses and seek a more defensible position. But I wasn't like most soldiers. I wasn't willing to give up, to abandon the bridge, to surrender to the enemy. I spotted an abandoned American anti-tank position nearby, a hastily constructed emplacement that had been overrun by the German advance. It was a risky move. The area was exposed, raked by enemy fire, but I knew that it was my only chance, our only hope. I ran towards it, crawling and sprinting through bursts of machine gun fire, dodging explosions, searching for anything I could use, anything that could give us an edge. And then I found it. Anti-tank grenades, a cache of powerful explosives left behind by the retreating American soldiers. Crawling and sprinting through the relentless storm of enemy fire, I got close enough to lob the grenades at the advancing tanks, using the element of surprise to my advantage. With the first grenade, I disabled another tank, the explosion ripping through its armor, disabling its tracks, and sending its crew scrambling for safety. With the second grenade, I forced another tank to pull back, its crew hesitant to advance further, fearing a similar fate. And with the third grenade, the remaining tank was abandoned entirely by its crew, their morale shattered, their confidence broken. In a matter of minutes, one lone private, armed with a bazooka and a handful of grenades, had halted an armoured advance meant to crush an entire defensive position, a feat of extraordinary courage and improbable skill that defied all logic and reason. And still, I wasn't done. Still, I refused to yield. While I was fighting the tanks, I spotted 5 wounded American soldiers stranded near a disabled half-track, their bodies riddled with shrapnel, their faces etched with pain and fear. They were pinned down by relentless machine gun fire, unable to move, their lives hanging in the balance. Without hesitation, I crawled across the road, under a hail of enemy fire, dodging bullets and explosions, risking my own life to save theirs. One by one, I dragged each man to safety, pulling them to the relative cover of a nearby ditch, ignoring the pain in my body, the fear in my heart, driven by a sense of duty and compassion that transcended all personal concerns. Once they were clear, once they were safe, I didn't retreat, I didn't seek cover, I didn't rest. I returned to the battlefield, not to surrender, but to fight, to continue the struggle against the enemy. I climbed onto the wrecked half-track, commandeered its mounted .50 caliber machine gun, and laid down a relentless stream of fire, unleashing a torrent of bullets at the advancing German infantry, forcing them to scatter, disrupting their attack, and buying precious time for the remaining American defenders. By the time the smoke cleared, the Germans had been pushed back, their advance stalled, their momentum broken. The bridge was still in American hands, a testament to the courage and determination of the men who had defended it, and I, Francis Sherman Currey, the quiet, unassuming 19-year-old from New York, was still standing, defiant, unbroken, a symbol of resistance in the face of overwhelming odds. But the battle for Malmedy wasn't over. The Germans would be back, determined to seize the bridge and crush the American defence. And I, the boy who had grown up with nothing, the orphan who had learned to fend for himself, wasn't finished showing them just how dangerous one soldier could be. Francis Sherman Currey should have been dead. By every rational calculation, by every military principle, a lone private armed with a Browning automatic rifle, a bazooka, and a handful of grenades should not have been able to stand against a coordinated Waffen-SS armoured assault. The odds were insurmountable, the enemy was superior, and the situation was hopeless. Yet, for reasons that would puzzle even the enemy, I did. I survived. I held the line. I defied the seemingly inevitable. The bridge was still contested. The Germans weren't retreating completely. They were regrouping, licking their wounds, and preparing for another assault. Infantry dug in, taking up firing positions in the surrounding woods and buildings, their rifles trained on the bridge, their eyes filled with hatred and frustration. Tanks edged cautiously forward, their engines rumbling, their guns scanning the landscape, wary of the killing ground where I had wreaked havoc on their advance. But I wasn't just holding the line, I was dictating the fight, controlling the tempo of the battle, and forcing the enemy to react to my actions. After clearing the bridge with anti-tank grenades, I repositioned myself, crawling back towards the disabled half-track where I had mounted the 50 caliber machine gun, a strategic location that provided a clear field of fire and allowed me to dominate the surrounding area. With the weapon stabilized, I unleashed controlled bursts of fire at the German infantry, pinning them down, suppressing their movements, and cutting off their support for the remaining tanks. It wasn't wild, indiscriminate shooting. It was precise, deliberate suppression, aimed at maximizing the impact of my limited ammunition and disrupting the enemy's coordination. The Germans responded with heavy fire, unleashing a torrent of bullets and mortar rounds at my position, trying to silence the machine gun that was wreaking havoc on their ranks. Bullets chewed into the wreckage around me, sending shards of metal and splinters of wood flying through the air. Mortar rounds landed close enough to rattle my teeth, shaking the half-track and threatening to send me flying off my perch. Any normal soldier would have abandoned that position, seeking cover in a safer location, but I stayed, resolute, defiant, refusing to yield an inch of ground. And when the machine gun overheated and jammed, its barrel glowing red-hot, its mechanism seized by the relentless firing, I didn't stop. I simply switched to my Browning automatic rifle, pouring fire into German positions, forcing them to withdraw deeper into cover, disrupting their attack, and buying precious time for the remaining American defenders. But the SS weren't done. They were too close to their objective, too committed to their mission to give up so easily. They had tanks still capable of pushing through, tanks that could break through our defences and seize control of the bridge, and if they coordinated one more strong assault, if they mustered their remaining forces and launched a concerted attack, the bridge and the men behind it would surely fall. I made sure that didn't happen. I took it upon myself to thwart their plans, to disrupt their attack, and to break their will to fight. Moving with an almost mechanical calm, my mind focused, my senses heightened, I scavenged Panzerfausts, German single-shot anti-tank weapons, left behind by the retreating infantry, discarded in their haste to escape the carnage. Using the enemy's own weapons, I stalked the battlefield, moving with stealth and precision, firing at the remaining armour with unnerving accuracy, each shot a calculated gamble, each hit a devastating blow. The effect was devastating. The crews of the remaining tanks, witnessing the carnage, their morale shattered, their confidence broken, abandoned their vehicles rather than risk being blown apart by the lone American soldier who seemed to be everywhere at once, a relentless force of nature, an unstoppable embodiment of defiance. The German advance sputtered and died, their momentum broken, their hopes dashed, their dreams of capturing the bridge reduced to ashes. By this point I had done more than just hold my ground. I had single-handedly broken the momentum of an SS offensive, a feat that would normally require a coordinated squad or an anti-tank team, a victory snatched from the jaws of defeat, and I did it under constant fire, under the most extreme pressure, at just 19 years old, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of individual courage. When the shooting finally stopped, when the smoke cleared, and when the dust settled, the bridge was still in American hands, a symbol of defiance against the German onslaught. The 5 wounded men I had rescued were alive, their lives spared by my actions, and the German assault had been blunted, their advance stalled, their plans thwarted. It was over, at least for now. The immediate threat had been neutralized, the enemy had been repelled, and the bridge had been saved. For my actions that day, for my extraordinary heroism and decisive action in the face of overwhelming odds, I was later recommended for and awarded the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration the United States can bestow, a symbol of ultimate sacrifice and unwavering devotion to duty. But even medals can't fully capture what happened at Malmedy. Even the most prestigious award can't adequately convey the scope of my actions or the impact they had on the course of the battle. This wasn't simply one soldier doing his duty. This was one soldier redefining what was possible on a battlefield, pushing the boundaries of human endurance, and shattering the expectations of both his comrades and his enemies. And the truth of why the Germans hesitated, why they pulled back instead of overwhelming me with their superior firepower, wouldn't become clear until much later, a revelation that would solidify my reputation as something more than just a brave soldier, a terrifying force of nature, a ghost in the machine, a legend born in the snow and fire of the Ardennes. When the smoke finally cleared, when the guns fell silent, and when the battle for the bridge at Malmedy was finally over, the landscape was littered with the wreckage of war, shattered tanks, destroyed vehicles, and the bodies of fallen soldiers, a grim testament to the brutality of the conflict. But amidst the devastation, a glimmer of hope remained. The bridge was still in American hands, a symbol of resistance against the German onslaught. German armour had retreated, their advance stalled, their plans thwarted. The wounded men I had dragged to safety were alive, their lives spared by my actions. And somehow, against all odds, the quiet, wiry private who had manned that position, the unassuming teenager from upstate New York, was still standing, defiant, unbroken, a testament to the power of individual courage. To the men who witnessed it, to the soldiers who had fought alongside me, the scale of what I had done was hard to comprehend. The audacity of my actions, the sheer improbability of my survival, defied all logic and reason. I had acted alone, without orders, improvising in real time, adapting to the ever-changing circumstances of the battlefield. I had faced Waffen-SS troops, men infamous for their ruthlessness, their unwavering commitment to their cause, and their utter disregard for the rules of war, and forced them back, breaking their momentum, shattering their confidence. It wasn't luck, it wasn't chance, it wasn't divine intervention. It was deliberate, calculated action, a combination of skill, courage, and unwavering resolve that had stopped a German advance dead in its tracks. In the immediate days following the battle, my story spread through my unit, carried by whispers and hushed conversations, a tale of improbable heroism and unwavering defiance. I wasn't a loud or boastful man. I didn't seek attention or crave recognition. But the men around me knew what they had seen. They had witnessed my actions firsthand, and they couldn't deny the truth of what had transpired. Word reached my commanders quickly. My superiors recognized the significance of my actions and the impact they had had on the battle. By March 1945, my company commander had formally recommended me for the Medal of Honor, citing my extraordinary heroism and decisive action in the face of overwhelming odds, a testament to the courage and skill I had displayed on that fateful day. On July 27, 1945, near Rheims, France, I was presented the Medal of Honor by Major General Leland Hobbs, commander of the 30th Infantry Division, a formal ceremony that recognized my valor and sacrifice. The official ceremony followed in August after the fall of Berlin, a grand event that celebrated the Allied victory and honored the heroes who had made it possible. But the honors didn't stop there. In addition to the Medal of Honor, I received the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, 3 Purple Hearts, and Belgium's Order of Leopold, a collection of accolades that testified to my service and sacrifice. My own division commander wasn't the only one impressed. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, reportedly told me that my actions at Malmedy had shortened the war by 6 weeks, a staggering assessment of the impact one soldier could have on the battlefield, a testament to the power of individual courage. Yet despite the accolades, despite the recognition, despite the fame that followed, I, Francis Sherman Currey, didn't act like a war hero. I didn't seek the spotlight. I didn't crave attention. I didn't revel in the glory. After the war, I chose a quieter path, a life of service and humility. I joined the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Albany, New York, working quietly as a counselor to other veterans, helping them to cope with the trauma of war, to heal their wounds, and to rebuild their lives. I understood their pain. I shared their experiences. I knew what it was like to face death on the battlefield and to carry the scars of war in my heart. I later ran a landscaping business, finding solace in the beauty of nature, nurturing plants and creating peaceful spaces. And eventually I worked in hotel convention planning in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, organizing events and helping people to connect and celebrate. I never bragged about my accomplishments. I rarely spoke about what happened at Malmedy. I preferred to keep my memories to myself, to protect myself from the prying eyes of the world. To the world, I was a decorated soldier, a war hero,